So you have to go by your notes on the first question, but from now on I'll make that recording available.
Okay.
Try
So
to
that
put
was,
those questions in your own words.
yep. That was the first, that was the prayer life, the family life.
Well, I was trying to put it all together in one question.
Seems like you did, because
You know,
about how it,
by setting the time of scripture and prayer in the beginning of the day and using that time to examine my calendar, I'm looking how I'm going to handle family and work and my own personal resources, and sorting out all these index cards, and to-do lists and calendar, and so everything needs to fit together into one purpose.
when you get all that, how much do you, I mean, that seems like it takes up a lot of your day.
Well, it takes a whole lot less to do the day if I do that first.
Okay, then. Let me see what the other thing here is. It says, you're calling to be a pastor.
Can you put that in question form?
Do you feel, how do you feel you were called to be a pastor?
So when I was a child and I gave my life to Jesus, we were singing, "Where he leads me, I will follow." So from the time I was a child, I began to explore what I was going to do with my life and what God's calling in my life was. I had a couple of ideas about it. I felt like whatever it was going to be a mission. It was going to be a ministry. At one point, I thought maybe I was going to be a foreign missionary. And I kind of got interested in a couple of missionary doctors. I thought maybe I'd be a missionary doctor, but I didn't really have the ability to do chemistry and that sort of thing. I didn't really want to go to medical school. I struggled with that, and with for a period of time, I read To Kill a Mockingbird, and I thought maybe God wanted me to be a lawyer, a criminal defense attorney.
That's with Gregory Peck, right?
Yeah, and I read the book and I watched the movie, and I was inspired by that, and that probably is one of the things that has made social justice an important part of my pastoral ministry. But little by little, I knew that ministering to people, serving people, preaching and teaching, the work of the church, the mission work of the church, and the mission of the church, pastoral care, those were the things that I was already doing as a teenager in my church, leading our youth group and giving leadership. And so I just sort of gravitated into that calling, so that when it was time to go to college, I knew that I was going to go to a college where I could have more opportunities to learn and to practice ministry. I didn't know whether I would be a youth pastor or a senior pastor, but I knew I'd be preaching and teaching. And so by my second year of college, I was already preaching on revival teams and doing evangelism, and then it was during my second year of college that I got called to a church as an associate pastor. And then I got called to another, and then I got married. And, I quit that.
During your second year, you was called?
Yeah, I quit that one church, and I was preaching in a number of churches, and there was a little field of 2 churches, and the director of missions had introduced me to them, and they called me as pastor. And when I was 21 years old, I became pastor of those 2 churches. And that pretty well sealed it for life.
That's a lot, because I'm saying most people don't get to be pastor of one church. I mean, there's a lot of associate pastors, right? but to be the pastor, because at my church, they went to multiple pastors one time, but you could tell who was the senior pastor. Nobody.
Well, I didn't have any other pastors helping me.
Huh?
I didn't have
I
any.
said my church at one time went to multiple pastors, but you can tell who was the senior pastor
Well, yeah.
and stuff.
Well,
The rest of them were messing
I'm
up
talking
bad,
about senior pastor as
that kind of discouraged
as
people.
a position.
Right.
I was what you call a solo pastor.
Solo?
Solo. That means I didn't have any assistants.
Right.
I was it for 2 churches.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That was a lot. I mean, because
I had deacons and teachers and leaders, and I was still in college at the time. I was a newlywed. I was in college. I lived in a home that was owned by the church, and I guess I made an adequate salary. I didn't make a lot of money, but they paid me adequately enough to live. I didn't need another job. My wife worked. She was still, well, no, she didn't work until she graduated. And she didn't graduate for about 1.5 years. And so when she graduated, she worked. And then in 1979, we resigned those 2 churches after about 3 years, and we moved to California to attend Gateway Seminary, Golden Gate at the time. And then for a period of time, I was doing supply preaching, and I was very involved in a local church, and I did church planting. And then in about September of 1980, I became pastor of a church where I stayed for 9 years in Fremont.
wow.
And then I went to San Jose for 6.5 years. During that period of time, while I was in Fremont, once again, we considered whether God was calling us to the foreign mission field. We went through a long process. We went to a week-long camp at Glorieta, New Mexico, that the Foreign Mission Board put on. And we explored the possibility for about 1 year, and then realized that our calling was to remain in California and help plant churches and help do intercultural work and mission work and pastoral work. And somewhere in there, I had about 3.5 years where I went in. I became part-time as pastor and full-time, well, equal amount of time as a director of missions for our association, interim director of missions. But I treated it like a full-time job. And I worked out of the convention. So
You must have been since you're 20, you must have been a pastor for 40 years.
46 years,
46?
Almost 46, 45, 46. Because I started at 20 as an associate pastor, getting paid for it. Been preaching since I was 17.
Wow, this says.
So I think that it'll be, come January, I will have been preaching for about 50 years. Had a lot of wonderful experiences with a lot of language and cultural groups. I've been able to preach in many different churches of different kinds. It's been a blessing. I've been able to do a lot of different kinds of work, from ESL missions, radio work, and internet work, and administrative work, and starting nonprofit organizations. It's been a very fulfilling life.
Okay. I would say so.
Thought about running for office at one point, and God saved me from that.
What office?
Oh, I thought about running for city council in Fremont. I'm glad I didn't.
We had a mailman, the postmaster, he ran on the council seat, right? And the council seat isn't that high, but people that knew him, they told so much about him. All his life, everything he did in life was brought up,
Oh, yeah.
It's a dirty game.
The dirty game. Okay. So you were going to ask how I came to Fresno, it looks like. The way I came to Fresno was I had been in San Jose for 6.5 years at a very difficult church. I think this is the time in this interview to give you personal reflections and not just textbook answers. So it had been a very difficult church. I had gone there. The former pastor had left to start a new church outside of the inner city in San Jose. He had taken some of the members in a friendly, it was a friendly sort of thing, but they wanted to go with him. He had recommended me. He felt like because of the nature of that church, they worked with a lot of addicts. They worked with a lot of community ministries. They had a unique form of government. And he felt like I would be the guy to do it. I didn't realize that when they contacted me. I knew that I'd had a couple of other recommendations, but I did not seek that job. I did not really even know about that church. And it was like 30 minutes away. Maybe it took me about an hour to get there from my house, 30 minutes or an hour, I don't know, 45 minutes. Anyway, I was very interested in what they did because it looked like, you know, they had jail ministries, they had support group ministries, they had a lot of ministries to people. When I got there, I realized that a lot of it was very dysfunctional. The relationships were dysfunctional. And they had not really broken ties with the former pastor. He was still coming by a lot. He was still involved in people's lives. There were still people that were leaking out the back door to go there. And at one point, they even tried to get rid of me. I was doing a lot of stuff, but I was on some boards. I was teaching adult ed. I was teaching in this program in Oakland. I was traveling all the way to Oakland to teach in this program that we had there, downtown Oakland, True Vine Church. And we had multiple churches in our building. So I got involved with the Vietnamese people and started an ESL school. It just had a great ministry, really. But I found that it was really hard to work with our elders. And we had been in a decline when I got there, and it was very difficult to reverse the decline. We had to do a lot of things to survive. I led the church to create some relationships with people that were renting the building, and that helped us survive financially. I'd been there 6 months, and I realized that they couldn't pay my salary in full, what they promised me. So I had to take like a $6,000 a year cut. Wow. And anyway, we got the church healthy again. And I thought, okay, I can stay. Because I had tried to resign at one point. It wasn't that many people trying to get rid of me. I just thought it was. I just thought if anybody wanted to get rid of me, I wanted to go. And but I rescinded that, and I stayed. And the church got pretty healthy. At least it got to the point where we could build. And that's when around September of 1995, our director of missions called me and said that the director of missions in Mid-Valley Association had called him, and that there was an unnamed church that was looking for my resume. So I said, well, if God's in that, I guess I better provide a resume. So I wrote a resume. I hurried up and wrote a resume. But I didn't really hurry up. It just took a long time. Finally got the resume in, and they got back in touch with me real soon after that. And we drug this thing out, the conversations. There was a guy named Lucky Ahigiator. He was a Nigerian prince. He was and a PhD, or doctor of public health. And he was the chair of the committee. And he kept calling me, and I was talking, and I found out what church it was eventually. And he said, well, can we get a tape of one of your sermons? Well, I'd never done that before, not for a church. No, and I thought, I don't want to do that. Well, I delayed it and delayed it and delayed it. And finally, I did it. Because we did record my sermons. We had a sound technician, and they recorded and made tapes. So I finally did one and sent it to them. Well, that was in December. They first contacted me in September. You can see I wasn't very anxious to come to Fresno. And on the day that they got it in the mail, that morning, that evening, they were meeting, and they decided that after looking through about 100 resumes and settling on me, that if the tape didn't come, they were just going to give up on me and move on. So they got the tape that morning.
That's good.
And they listened to it and decided they wanted to pursue me. They felt like God was in it. So they called me back. They said, we still want to move on. Can we send you we put together a notebook that talks about our church and our community. And it was full of well-intentioned lies. But I looked at it. So in January, which is the wrong time to look at Fresno, we just decided one Sunday afternoon we'd drive to Fresno and look around. Well, we drove by the church, and it looked like a jail. I mean, it had bars on all the windows, had a gate around it. It just looked horrible. It was in a dying neighborhood, and we went over to Sizzler and said, I think I'm gonna call Lucky back and say, Dr. Lucky, you need to move on, look for somebody else. So that next day, I'm sitting around the house getting ready to call Lucky, and we're watching this guy who's a cooking show on PBS. And he had, have I ever told you this?
No.
Okay, so he was a former Methodist preacher, and he'd gone into becoming a chef, and he was one of these chef shows, and he was cooking with leeks and onions. And he said he was reminded of the Israelites who in the desert thought they wanted to go back to Egypt because they missed the leeks and the onions. And it hit me, was I afraid that I would not have any more leeks and onions because I love the Bay Area so much? Was that why? And I said, well, I guess I better find out if God is in this move. And so I called him back. I said, okay, I was going to call you and tell you to forget it, but God spoke to me today and said I better keep pursuing it and find out if the Lord's in it. So he sent me the book, and then he said, we need to set up, what did he say? Oh, we need to set up a meeting. Can you come to Fresno? So sometime in February, this started in September, remind you, I drove to Fresno for the evening, and they put me up in a nice hotel, and I met with the committee. I had about 50 questions I wanted to ask them. If the answers were not right, I was gonna call it off. Well, by the end of the meeting, I thought God was calling me to Fresno.
Wow.
And then I came back, and then they came back up to San Jose and listened to me preach, and we met again. And then they called me back in view of a call in March, I guess, early March. And I spent all week, my whole family came, and we spent all weekend with the church. And then that evening, in their evening service, they voted unanimously to call me to the church in Fresno. That was in March of 1996. And then on April 1st of 1996, I became pastor.
Oh, you've been there a long time.
So I've been here 25 years. Yeah. So it was very clear to me that God was calling me, but I was very stubborn. I wasn't going to come unless God was surely calling me. And Fresno has been a very difficult pastorate. I'm not going to say any of these have been easy. Every one of them has gotten harder.
Wow.
Every one of them has gotten harder, but I've gotten better prepared. And, but this one, this one has been a blessing. It's been hard. It's been a hard blessing.
Yeah, like my pastor right now, I look at him. When I get mad at him sometimes, I look at all the things he had to go through with people, right? And it's been quite a bit. And I put down one of my questions, I put that part as more like questions a pastor candidate would ask the people that are looking to hire him, because the church can't, my church couldn't afford to pay the pastor. They give him a love offering of $400. That's why I said, I don't know how some people at pastor make it,
Well, I mean, obviously he needs to work a job. We've had pastors that I've had under my supervision that, we weren't able to pay them a living wage. And so, it was necessary for them to support themselves, especially the Hmong pastors. And as they became autonomous, those churches, I would advocate for them. I would go and say, you expect so much from your pastors and you pay them so little. And then they have to get an income because they all have big families. One of our pastors had 11 children. And so, they're busy night and day. But the call, it doesn't matter whether you're paid or unpaid. It's if you're not called to be where you are, the discouragement is going to be just too overwhelming.
Wow. That's incredible. Let me see this next one. I hate to move on. We talked about the call to the church. Any troubles with I think you really talked about that trouble with your call already. So,
well, the biggest trouble is,
huh?
I guess the biggest trouble is, when people don't want to follow, or, when people have disagreements with you personally, and you feel like, you haven't done everything you could to resolve those. I had more of those problems in the beginning. I had fewer of those problems as I got toward this stage of my ministry. I actually had a denominational guy that wanted to question some decisions that I was making. And I had to deal with him because, I felt like he was out of place, but I had to deal with me even more, my attitudes toward him.
Wow.
But I see that the next question is about my personal sin. Well, I have plenty of them.
I went online to get these questions, so.
It seems like when I get one under control for a while, another one takes its place. So I'm always dealing with sin in my life, both personal, private, internal sin, and
Yeah, you kind of froze past the time when you said, seemed like when I get one of them under control.
another one pops up.
Right.
Well, I think that at this stage of my life, most of my most troubling sins are in my own mind. The sins of my own mind, my own heart. But I have to deal with pride, even when I say that, and then questioning, myself. The other day, I used to really have a definition of success that I dreamed for myself. And I kind of made decisions that took me away from that. I felt like those were, that I was doing the things God wanted me to do, but I always dealt with the feeling that some of my friends who I felt maybe were not not as competent as me were doing so much better than me. You know, they had bigger churches, they had bigger salaries, they had bigger followings, they had less trouble. They had one really good friend who, you know, became very successful, pastor of a mega church. And one friend I went to school with, he wasn't pastor of a mega church, he's pastor of a very large church. He had a very big ministry, but his son-in-law became one of the biggest preachers in America.
Wow.
And so those kinds of things, I was talking to my wife the other day. I said, I don't know whether I've been a success or a failure, but I guess it really doesn't matter.
I don't think they're gonna judge you by the size.
Well, I can't judge it by anything. That's the thing. Have I faithfully followed God's leadership in my life? And that's all. That's all I can evaluate it on. And when we come to the end of our service, we have to realize that we weren't working for ourselves, or we weren't working to please people, but we're working to please God. So that's those are the kinds of sins I work with. Those and you know, just doing things for my own gratification, pleasure, fulfill my own appetites. I have to put all that in place. But God is faithful and God's full of grace.
Because out here, like I said, all the pastors that came to my church, the head pastor's still there. The rest of them, one walked in and said he was the assistant pastor, and nobody told him that he was. Like I told you, the one that caught taking TVs out of Walmart. And he used to always be a thorn in my side when I teach in the new members class, because he wanted to show what he knew, what he didn't know. But I think a lot of places I've gone to, people have had less than 20 people in the church. And when I say that, half of them didn't show up, right?
Yes.
That's discouragement, right? Then I come to find out from friends that knew them, they were debating whether they should close the church down or keep going. And, you know, yesterday, a lady, her husband, he goes every now and then to the church, but he's really been having a battle with diabetes and a series of small strokes.
Mm.
But the car broke down and she asked for help, right? And the church poured out his heart to it. You know, they gave her the offering. And the lady I'm going to do tomorrow with this pastor thing, she told me that's a sign of true Christianity, you know, that people come together to help. Because she was telling me the church that she was going to at one time, it had millions of dollars. And when somebody needed a loan, they gave them so much trouble.
Wow.
You know, some people had to put their house up for collateral to get a loan.
Yeah.
I never heard of that, but that's what she and someone else told me.
Well, your turn to ask another.
Okay. We talked about the ones you struggle with the most. What are the top 3 responsibilities for a pastor? And I put down prayer, discipleship, leading the church. It's like I'm answering the question there. But what are the top 3 responsibilities for a pastor, in your opinion?
Well, a pastor is a shepherd. So as a Christian, I'm going to do prayer. I'm going to disciple people, whether I'm a pastor or not. So I'm going to do those things. Those are my responsibilities as a Christian. So I think that as the pastor, leadership is primary. I have to lead the church. I have to lead the people. I have to help them grow in their own leadership. And in order to accomplish that, there are three tools I think that are available. One is preaching. So I need to make sure that my preaching is the best it can be. Teaching, and there are many ways I teach, through writing, through now recording, being on the internet, or teaching classes, or teaching on, in prayer meetings and other times, and teaching, and then mentoring one-on-one with people. So I think those are the three ways that, of course, administration is in there somewhere, but I prefer to use people to help me with my administration. And I would rather teach them how to do it and equip them to do it. So I believe that the primary thing in leadership is equipping the saints for the work of the ministry, which is what Ephesians says. And I believe that in my pastorate, my role, every pastor is going to find their own priorities for how they do it based on the gifts that God has given them. But the three ways that God has enabled me to accomplish that leadership has been through preaching, teaching, and mentoring.
Wow. Let's see. How would you influence the staff for your view as pastor?
Well, the first thing is I choose them carefully. And I choose people that I believe are teachable and will have either a shared vision for the church that I have.
You broke up a minute.
Sir?
You had broke up for 1 second. You said
you just have that a similar vision, or they can learn that vision.
Right.
So I look for people that I can influence, but who may have a different perspective than me. The other thing is, as I have had staff through the years, both volunteer and paid, is influence comes through time. So leadership is influence, and you influence people you spend time with. So I started doing this even with summer missionaries when they would come out from other parts of the country. I would say, let's meet regularly for just some teaching and some reflection on what you're doing this summer. I want you to gain from it. But I've always felt like when I had a staff, I need to have some time with them, that we study together, pray together. And then I first, I'm their pastor as well as their leader. So I influence them that way: talk, conversation, role modeling, sometimes supervision. Yeah.
Wow. The next one. Tell us about the last time you disagreed with the staff at your church. Conflict relation. You have to go on nothing personal. Just the last time you disagreed.
Well, it's more about, did they disagree with me? Because there's one thing I learned early on in ministry is I have to set the pace.
You have to start with?
I have to set the pace.
Oh,
And if you're the leader, you set the pace. And so do they agree with you or not? But then I've had staff members to come in and say, I disagree with you about this, or here's my view, and I've disagreed with them. And so we first start with, let's talk about it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you have something I can learn. You always have to be humble. You have to be humble and be willing. But, I've always expected my staff to support me outside of the office, that we have a unified front when we went out among the people. So I've always felt like they could say anything to me, but that when we went out to the people that we stood together. So I frequently had disagreements on priorities with a wonderful staff member that is now deceased. He was a very good friend of mine. He left my church. He never exactly told me why. He was a volunteer staff member most of the time. Sometimes he was paid. He was always very openly supportive of me. But he used to think sometimes that I had the emphasis in the wrong place. And we would have very frank discussions about it. And when he was at that place where he thought like that he couldn't go in the same direction, he graciously stepped aside. So we remained friends. In fact, I preached his funeral. And I loved him very much. He loved me very much. We worked through the conflicts, but God was taking him in a different direction. So there were never any hard feelings about that. And I've always tried to make sure there were no hard feelings with people. I did have a couple of people that I had to dismiss. A youth pastor who had a very severe problem that was just out of control, and we couldn't do anything. We had to let him go. But he actually opted to go. He wouldn't come under the discipline, so he chose to disappear. But we stayed in touch. And so through the years with staff, I've always felt like I've tried to gather team players. And when they felt like they couldn't be team players, I'd help them find another ministry. And
it takes a lot of, how can I put it? It takes a lot.
What does take a lot, it takes years off your life sometimes, but it's a much more peaceful way to be.
Yeah, I learned that in the Navy. I mean, you just a low ranking E6 and people want you to do everything. And there's a lot of people above you, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If we place you, put you in different places.
At least you have a well-defined chain of command in the Navy.
I don't know. It's seeing that way on paper. So that was the conflict. Question number 7. What does your husband or wife feel about you being a pastor?
My wife has always accepted that was God's call for me. She did not feel that meant anything about his call in her life, that she was never going to. She always resisted anyone imposing a role on her because she was married to the pastor. But she always supported me. I don't think she always liked being the pastor's wife, but she always supported me, and she always helped me. And she spent a great number of years making sacrifices so I could do what God called me to do. But where she always drew the line was she was not gonna put on a certain kind of hat or do a certain kind of job just because people thought that's what a pastor's wife was supposed to do or be. So through the years, she's had careers, and she's taken leadership in the church, but it was never the stuff that people expected. She became the administrator of our church eventually, and the business manager, and often the person that was leading all the, the work projects, because she understood those things. So she stepped out of traditional roles, not just for pastors' wives, but for women in general. And so I've always respected that about her.
Wow.
So does she like it? She's pretty disgruntled with the traditional church, but sometimes I am too. But she's been a great support to me.
Wow.
I couldn't have asked for a better helper.
And sometimes, like, they want the wife to teach Sunday school, play the piano, and stuff. On this next part, I guess 8 to 6 is just 3. Which ones? Because you said that only asked 10 questions, right?
Well, I'll answer them all.
Okay.
What is the leadership structure of your church? Well, you can't get away from the 80-20 principle. That's the Pareto principle. We learned about that in one of the other classes. It's going to happen whether you fight it or not. But the leadership structure of my church has been, I am a strong leader, and I work through other leaders. And on the really important decisions, we make them together. Like our decision to sell all our property, we came to a consensus about that. But I did all the legwork. My wife and I, we put together all the deals, and the church, and I took them gently through the process.
Does that come back to haunt you?
Of course. Of course, I bear all the responsibility that way. If I made a mistake, it's my mistake. But I think that we did the right thing. I think we did what God was calling us to do. And we didn't do it until the church was behind us. But, we knew we were taking, every time we took a risk, I told the people, we were taking risks. And risks don't mean that you're going to succeed. Risks mean that you could fail. And I said, we have to be willing to fail in order to attempt the right things. And we failed a lot. But if you go with that understanding of following God's direction, you can't complain if you fail.
Yeah.
You have to say, well, God has the larger plan, and God has the larger perspective. We don't measure things the way God does.
Yeah, this one deaconess, she goes to a church now that her mother was a member of this Methodist church, and they was in all kind of places, and they finally wound up getting this building. Now they're one of the more prominent Methodist churches, but it's still small, but it's a nice sized building. You could put a good mid-sized 600 member body in there. But now that he's gone, and no, Methodists reassign you different places. Now that he's gone, everybody else seems to want to take credit for what their young man.
I will tell you something that is part of my philosophy of the church. Churches do have lifespans, like human beings do. And some of them can and do die, and need to die to make room for new life. And we birthed a lot of churches that are thriving. We gave birth to new churches. We gave birth to new ministries. We helped churches that needed our facilities to grow, and they're doing well. And we were able to, in the end, to provide a space for a Spanish-speaking church to grow. and some other ministries, and to launch some pastors. So I felt called to continue to minister to the older people, the people that felt called to that neighborhood. We sent families away and they've joined other churches and they helped those churches grow. We stayed there. We stayed there with the folks and we buried a lot of people. I've buried hundreds of people. And,
Wow.
I believe that was God's call. And so I look back, I see there's a lot of ministry going on that we can't take credit for, but we had a part in. And so I do not believe that it is the primary goal of the church to survive. I do not believe that that is a goal for the church. To survive is not to thrive. It's to lay down our lives like Christ did and to be willing to be used by God. So personal success is not how I measure ministry success. That sounds better than when I hear it. I mean, that sounds good before I say it, but it would be hard to tell some of these young, ambitious pastors that.
Yeah, they don't see it that way.
Right.
I know it's how I got in trouble one time, as a mailman, because it was one lady who was a secretary, and the other guy was he was a musician at a Word of Life church, right? And they believe all of the tongue speaking. And I asked him, what kind of work you do? And he said he played an instrument. And I guess they heard of this job over at Mount Calvary. It's a big church. Well, I don't know who all practiced, but I know a lot of people came out to audition for the music ministry, right? Paying money. But my biggest thing was, what do you do if you don't get that job? And they hang around the church all day long trying to play music. I got to the point where I don't talk to them no more about things like that because I don't know if I'm hurting them or not.
When I met with my ordination committee back in 1976.
What?
They asked me a question. The last question they asked me, they were going to recommend to the church whether or not I should be ordained. They said, what will you do if this committee does not recommend your ordination? I said, exactly what I'm doing now. I said, I'm not going to change anything. I will continue to pastor this church. I will continue to do what God has called me to do. I said, it won't make a bit of difference whether you choose to recommend me or not. Apparently it was the right answer.
Well, I used to, before I talked to you, I think you told me there is a calling. I had gotten the debate because somebody told me there was no call, right? And what they meant by that, the word call was never associated with being a pastor. And I took a class with ministry with seminary extension.
Yeah.
They were talking about, they used the word installation instead of ordained. And, like in Timothy and Titus, it says, if you desire the job, right? But as I come to learn, I even read a thing where it said, I was praying that you pray for the job and God give you the filling. And they related it to when you assigned Job last year to me to read, they said, you can't ask God for a filling. And I said, why is that? And they say, it's his sovereign power to fill people for ministry as he please, So
We could serve at his pleasure.
I don't know how to answer people with that.
Well, I think God calls us to many different things. Sometimes God calls us to get up and join that coach that the eunuch is riding on the road back to Egypt. God called Philip to go join himself to that wagon and get on it. It was a short call, but that was a call.
Wow.
So I think calling is, we have a big calling to follow Christ, and then we have sub callings, and then we have momentary callings. I'm not going to get too hung up on it.
Yeah, I hear you.
Want to ask the next one?
Let's call. Let me see. Oh.
Accountability.
Yeah. We just read the structure of the church. Who holds the pastor accountable?
Well,
I should say who holds you accountable.
well, that's good. Yeah. God holds me accountable for one thing. I'm older now, like you. It's hard to find people to hold me accountable. I've always been held accountable by boards and by committees and by the church as a whole. The church holds me accountable. Every now and then I will ask for someone to mentor me on something, and I ask them to hold me accountable. But through the years, it's usually been a board or some deacons, but I also had elders, I had mentors that held me accountable. Some of those people have been my directors of missions. Roland Bailey. He actually lived till a few years ago. He was in his late 90s when he died. I went to college with his daughter. He was my first director of missions. And I used to go to him with questions, how to do things. And he would advise me. And I recently wrote a note to his daughter telling her how much she meant to me in doing those things. And then when I came out to California, it was Buren Higdon. And he was a much older guy than me. And he really, after he retired, he was still accountable, but I always had the church held me accountable because I always felt like, my life was not entirely my own and my work was not entirely my own. And even though I was the leader and had to take the initiative, you see what happens when you take the initiative, when you are the leader, is that if anything goes wrong, you're the one that's responsible. The buck stops with you. And I was willing to take that. And so when I spent some time as an executive director in both the association and then in another nonprofit, I had boards. I put together boards of directors, and they were my bosses. So I had to give them reports every month or two about what I was doing and the direction I was taking things in, how I was leading staff. Everybody reported to me and I reported to them. And they didn't try to micromanage me, and I certainly didn't ask them to. But God's always brought people into my life to remind me that I was ultimately accountable to him.
It's like both the teachers at Wyoming and the one in Illinois, even my younger pastor teacher at Hawaii, all of them had trouble with people that they were working for. Like one in Hawaii said they didn't want him to preach, do something, but he became a pastor. Then the one in Illinois, he's been all around. He got his calling in the Navy, and he was doing this most of his Navy career. His Air Force career. He retired officer, but he said he had more trouble with deacon boards and people like that. Other pastors that were associated formally with the church, right? And they caused them to get terminated. Then Wyoming was really, he was kind of funny, and he said, like, when you come to Wyoming, right? And he said, a lot of people that come to Wyoming, they pass the wives, they want things to be like where they came from, Chicago and stuff like that. In Wyoming's not that way. And battles over doctrine. And that's where I've learned where a deacon in a church, right? I mean, an old lady in the church can have 4 or 5 sons in the church that are deacons, and they hold a lot of power, right? So he was telling me about that.
A lot of people can have power, but yeah, you got to manage that. Now, I still have accountability. For instance, in this program, you know, I make, for my center, I have parameters. Gateway sets parameters. So I answer to Dr. Haynes. Dr. Warren Haynes is the director of the overall program. If he wants to take the program in a different direction, then I need to follow him or get out. In the volunteer work I do with SCORE, where I'm mentoring business people, there's a director. I've moved up into leadership since I joined, but there's a guy I ask, you know, and I said, what are the policies? What are the national policies? I just took an ethics class today in there, you know, an online ethics class. We have a code of ethics. We have to take a class every year. Like, we can't promote ourselves or our own businesses when we're, you know, we're coaching someone about their business. We can do certain things, other things we can't do. That's a form of accountability. And I have no problem with that as long as I understand it. And so I've always had people in my life that maybe not in pastorate, but in parts of my life that could remind me that I'm not the boss of the world. And I'm definitely not the boss of God.
True.
All right. How do I invest in the church staff?
So you taking the leadership and reading them.
Is that the question you want to ask?
Yeah.
I kind of did invest in it. It's time.
Time?
Yeah, if you're not willing to give some time to your leaders, you shouldn't have them.
Wow.
And so time. Now, from time to time, I've invested money in it. You know, I've bypassed having a raise so that I could give a little something as incentive to for a salary to a staff member. I had one staff member that we paid him $1 a year, and he actually put it in he framed it and put it on his wall. He never cashed the check. We wrote him the check. I said, I want you to be an employee, so we're going to pay you $1 a year.
He never had to declare that, I don't think.
No, because he never cashed the check.
And I learned like in church administration, you got, it's something about like how many employees you got to offer medical, people work so many hours, you got to give them something.
Yeah, but a lot of people never get close to that. A lot of people never get close to that.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I think it's 30 hours, isn't it? Is it 20 or 30? I don't know whether it's 28 or 30 hours that you have to do medical.
Yeah.
Well, you have to, you know, you have to withhold taxes. You have to do all the legal requirements. But I will say that it always seemed to me that if we could, if I could sacrifice $400 a month off my salary to have somebody who was a part-timer, you know, that's not a lot of money. It's not a lot of hours, but that the ministry would go better if I had a team. And so when I was in Fremont, I did this more than anywhere else I was. in Fremont, we had, we were close enough to the seminary that I would hire seminary students to be on my staff. At one point I had 3 that were all working at the same time. I had one that was doing junior high work. Well, one that was doing education. And then I think there was maybe an overlap in music. But anyway, one of the guys that did music was also like an associate pastor. And I would bring these people on. I thought it was a great investment, not only into their lives, but also into our church. And I could have said, well, just give me that money, but that wouldn't have gotten as much return. The time is the main thing.
Wow. Let me see. Number 11. Did you believe that do you believe that speaking in tongues is a requirement for salvation? I put that there because when you bring in people that believe that could be a distraction sometimes.
But what would you learn from that in terms of how to be a better pastor?
Huh?
What would you learn from that in terms of your goal of these interviews to become a better pastor?
It'd be having tolerance for people with different views.
Okay.
That you're not.
I don't believe it's necessary for salvation. Nothing necessary for salvation except our faith in the grace of God.
Right. There are people that believe that.
Yeah.
So
that was an easy question.
So they won't be teaching something different.
Yeah. Well, that would be important if you were interviewing somebody for a job.
Right.
Remember with the other people that you interview that your reason for this interview is for your own personal growth, not to hire them.
Oh, for my own personal growth?
Yeah. This is a learning experience for you.
Okay. The 2-for-1 view. If you become pastor, your spouse will also work in the church. You already answered that.
I did. Yes. There's no 2-for-1 in my family. If you want to hire her, you hire her. I did give her a $300 a month salary once, but she only took the check once since she was in charge of getting the checks written. And then she worked for 11 years full time running our thrift store and being really essentially the associate executive director of our nonprofit. And she never took a salary. She gave people salaries, but she never took one.
Wow.
But if I had told her that it was 2-for-1, I could have gotten slapped upside the face.
Power to women. Do you also serve outside the church? Do you work with people in the community?
Always. Always. I have always worked in community work as a volunteer and a representative of my church. I've always been involved in civic affairs and interdenominational fellowships and boards, nonprofits, community work. I've always made it a point to know the public officials and to, be a part of the community I believe that it's important for the church to provide its pastor as a community leader, unless that pastor is too busy.
You broke up a couple of times, Tom.
I've always believed that it's important that if you're a full-time pastor, that is, you don't have to work a full-time job outside the church, that the church provides some of that time for the pastor to give leadership to the community. And so I've always been a part of giving leadership to the community in a number of different ways. And I've always believed that my presence in community events, you can't do everything, but
Right.
that was an important part of my ministry. That I was not just the pastor to my church, but I was the pastor of my community.
Wow. See, I'd be lost to that. I don't got a clue how to start with that one.
Well,
I know.
the way I started with it was just by going out and being out there, walking the street,
Just going out.
going out and being there, getting to know people and going to meetings wherever I was invited. And eventually they start handing things over to you to do.
Wow.
You start, I found out about the chaplaincy at the hospitals and, I joined it. And, you get to know other pastors that are involved in the community. I was asked to be a part of addressing the homeless problem in Fremont. I did it. I was teaching a class in community education through the school district in San Jose. And a lady asked me to come and be a part of a board of an organization she was on that provided counseling in the schools. And then, all of these things have just been a part of being present. First, you make yourself present in the community, and then you have those opportunities to pastor people. Because I joined Toastmasters, I became the unofficial chaplain to a fellow Toastmaster. I was being chaplain to the people in the Chamber of Commerce because she worked for the Chamber of Commerce. I met her through Toastmasters. And then now, after a couple of weddings and funerals, she just says, essentially, he's been our family's pastor all these years, and she's never come to my church.
Wow.
I've been their family's pastor because I've been the pastor to the community.
Yeah, that's like that lady about that pastor with the TV set, my deaconess that went to the Methodist church and the church split. She did a lot of that, but I was joking with her. I said, you think you're good at it because all these people she be working with. Now, I shouldn't say that. It was just two of them. The last person she picked and was pretty high on him, he was running for city council. And they found out he almost murdered his wife.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know what's up with Pat, with these people, but a lot of people love her and pick her to do things.
I have taken a lot of heat for this through the years. I've taken more heat for them, even from other pastors and from one of my directors of missions. He told the guy he was mentoring to stay away from me because he said, he's got his priorities wrong, but I still believe I was right.
Oh, man.
So I don't worry about what people think about that. The fruit is on the tree.
I hear you. Let me see, number 14. I don't even know if this one fits in there. I'll put it in there. How do you define evangelism?
Proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God in Jesus Christ.
Okay, that basically take care of that one. Now.
So I don't think that the 15th question is relevant to this assignment because this is like if you're interviewing somebody for a job and you're not, you're just trying to learn what they've learned over 20, 30, 40 years of ministry.
And that's what I was writing, is there somebody looking for a job, but you said the personal growth.
So really the 16th one is not relevant either.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'll tell you a story about someone who did this assignment about 4 years ago. His name is Daniel. And Daniel had a hard time finding some pastors to interview. And he interviewed his own pastor. He was associate pastor, volunteer associate pastor. So he went down to the Church of God in town. And he really asked for an hour of this pastor's time. So after about 2 hours of interviewing this pastor, the guy said, would you like to come to work for me here? And so he said, I have to go through a process. We have to work with the committee, but we're looking for a youth pastor. He said, would you like to come and be the full-time youth pastor here? We'd want you to quit your job and work full-time here. So after a couple of months, he was the full-time, he still is. He became the full-time, and he used the education with this program to qualify for that job. And yeah, he's full-time. He's doing what God called him to do.
That's incredible. Like my pastor, he knows I'm going to this, but I don't call. I mean, I don't miss church often, right? And I do everything they want, like the new members. And he knows I'm chanting this. He doesn't know how far along I am. I just have a plan. You know, I'm writing a book. I call it The Table, and it's about the various subjects you teach in the Baptist program. Because I see when you're at the table, people ask you a lot of questions about Baptists. You know, like the Northern Baptists, I was calling them, and then you gave me the correct name. I knew that from taking Baptist history, but I wasn't going that way. But I'm saying, the Old Testament, New Testament. I'm trying to learn biblical background. I did that at seminary extension, but I didn't take the final, and I didn't ask my pastor to proctor the final, because everything I give him, I lose. But I plan on getting my English a little better and showing up in September, October, right? And I'll go down, I'll take the praise testimony. I've been listening to him preach. And one of the funniest things, we all talk about expository preaching. And my wife asked me about that. I said, it's just like what your pastor was doing, but somehow you got to come back. This is just my version of it. You got to come back to the scripture text that you read, and you got to explain it. It should be to the point. If you were doing expository preaching and you preach from one book, people can say, well, I learned that book under this pastor,
Yeah.
But I wanted to get ready to do that. I'm not nervous about anything. Like I said, like I told you, took a couple classes at seminary extension, and that was because there was no new members coming into the church, And then this one, I got in a debate with theology, and the lady was saying, how do you know all this? How do you know all this? And I told her this thing about salvation, right? I got in trouble with this one lady. She was the pastor's cousin, right?
Yeah.
Always going over the lesson again and again and again. So I go pick her up from the house there in the Crest, and which is the rough area. And this guy comes up, he's a brother, but she told me somebody gave him some bad drugs. That's why he lost his mind. And as we drive in the church, we're talking about that. And somehow we get on the kind of work she does. And she had worked for the VA. And as I listened to her, we're talking. Finally, I found out why she keep wanting to go over the lesson of salvation, because I went over it 8 times and read it from different books, Schaeffer, Rowry, Erickson. I like his smaller book, Miller Erickson, the doctrine one.
Yeah.
It turned out she was passing from cancer.
Oh my.
Huh?
I said, oh my.
I thought, because she had lost a lot of weight, was looking good. Then I said, wow, I didn't realize you was sick like this. And every week, she couldn't do enough for Christianity then, And it kind of reminded me, like before I came to this class, I had that attack with AFib. And I wasn't afraid of dying, but I said, I've been a cardinal Christian all my life, even though, but you know the word. And I said, well, I didn't want you to take me out this way. As soon as I said that, the machine started going up,
Oh, really?
My heartbeat started to stable. It's just like the Lord has done a lot of things for me. Stopped traffic. When I fell, I couldn't get up because my legs were locked. And everybody said, well, if you go through surgery, you're not gonna be able to do this job as a mailman. Surgery helped me out to the point where I don't even know I got a hip replacement. But
Amen.
it's different things that God and everybody up there asked me, how come you don't do the pastor thing? Like when they have a question and answer, I participate in that a lot, and it's kind of hard. I think I know the questions better than my pastor most times, but I don't try to. I never try to show him up or anything like that. That's why we have a good relationship. And, anything he asks me, but I just feel I can surprise them. They asked me to be a deacon, but, I would like to just go out and minister because I don't think I'm cut out to do a lot of leadership in the way you do it, Tom. You know how I think a lot of this, you got a lot of natural ability.
Well,
I mean, you might have to.
God will give you whatever you need for whatever he calls you to do, but
Okay.
that's the, you just make yourself available to him and he'll open some doors and they'll fit your personality.
Oh, that's cool. That takes a lot of pressure off of me.
Yeah.
So anything we got, you said this book.
Well, you're reading the book, right? You're keeping up with the reading?
What is the reading there? 'Cause I didn't see you had a reading for the other one.
I had it in the schedule. I have it in the schedule on the syllabus.
For this one too?
You should be in that one by now. You should be finished with this one.
Right. We finished that one last week.
Yeah. And then this one, yeah, I have those pages in the syllabus too.
Oh, really? I better take another look at
So
that.
I'm going to give you, I want you to go ahead and get caught up before I give you more videos or anything.
Okay.
So let me know when you've watched all those, so I'll send you another batch. And if we need to meet again this week, we will.
Okay, so I'll be up on, by the end of this week, I could be up on page 109 in this book.
Okay, that will be good.
Let me mark it. And what I'll do, I'll send you those reports on this. Do they have to be real lengthy?
No, shorter is better.
Because I read this one. I thought it was going to be boring. And he didn't know what he was talking about. And by the end, I couldn't hear enough of this guy.
Huh.
I mean, he was telling you that it reminded me of myself. I said I was a Christian, but my wife, she took me to go to church, right? But I didn't go back to church for years, almost, like 18 or more years till I came out to Vallejo.
Uh-huh.
And I would tell people I was a Christian, but it wasn't until I read that tract by Billy Graham and started studying what I'm saying. I didn't know you need to know the death and birth, the gospel, right? And it took me a while. By teaching a new members class, I learned that faith doesn't save you, right? Because it has no power in it. But what I'm saying is there's power in understanding. And that's really what helped me to become a Christian. I say I'm a Christian now. I was a cardinal Christian, but I knew right and wrong. And now I'm pretty much straight. Like I gave a lecture on it the other day at my church. One of the older guys, we were talking, somehow we got on the subject of marriage, right? 'Cause everybody was moving to Florida. And he said, well, you get married, women want this, want that. I said, you got a balance in life. How do you want to live? If you burn with passion, you get married. I mean, you don't have a girlfriend, but the battles will always be there.
There will always be battles. But Christ helps us with those battles.
Yeah. I mean, I benefit from it, but I don't know if they want to benefit. But I'll put it this way. I'm one of those persons, like I wouldn't marry a gay couple, but I'll tell them they can come to the church as long as they want to live by the book. You know, that's the way I look at it. So I'll be up to 109 and I'll start feeding. I'd rather send them, I'll probably do it as a group this week at the end of the, right before Monday, I'll send you the ones that I did. Don't be surprised if I looked at them all.
Okay. Well, then at some point I'll send you another batch.
All right.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time of sharing about real practical things in ministry. This is really what it's about. It's where the rubber meets the road. This is what this course is really about, more than anything else, more than any readings or videos or lectures. It's about how you work in our lives to form us into the ministers you would have us to be. So help Claude as he seeks you for your direction in his life, in his family, in his ministry, in his church. And may he be a blessing to his pastor and to his church. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Oh, I'm gonna read that one you had on ministry, it was 7 things about ministry, about preaching.
Yeah.
But if you have any more on preaching, just let me know. All right.
Well, I have a whole batch. If that's the direction you want to spend some time in,
That's good.
I'll get that all to you.
All right then.
All
I
right.
appreciate it.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.